So I'm here with Drew. I'm Dr. Scott, and we're going to talk about some different topics with hiking and just kind of banter back and give our opinions on each one. I think the first topic we wanted to cover was footwear.
Yep.
So Drew, what kind of footwear do you usually like for hikes?
Yeah, it's funny because when I look back on all the hikes that I've done, I've worn everything, right?
Yeah.
I've worn like full-on hiking boots, and then there was actually a time where I forgot my hiking boots, and so I had to wear sandals like you're wearing right now. Would definitely not recommend that by any means, but usually for me, depending on the hike, I like to go more with like the comfortability side of things, and so I usually go with trail runners just because they're a little bit more comfortable for me, a little bit more mobile. And then when I'm doing a little bit extra, maybe tougher hikes or more technical hikes, I usually go with approach shoes. Approach shoes are kind of in between rock climbing shoes and trail runners, and so they have they're a little bit more sturdy, and so they're easier to get into little crevices and everything when you're rock climbing. So that's personally what I like, but obviously if you have history of ankle injuries and stuff like that, you probably want to get full-fledged hiking shoes that have the ankle support that go along with it.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, in agreement with you. And it's funny, these are actually listed as hiking sandals. But I'm like, I don't want hiking sandals either.
Probably not.
Unless you're on like a completely flat trail, like I'm definitely not into that. But I love what I have for everyday use. But I would agree, like comfort matters a lot. I just bought a pair of Ultra hiking shoes, which are so comfortable. I don't know if you've tried those yet, but they got a nice cushion to them, and they've got the wide toe box, which I like in shoes. Give people some room for their toes to spread out a little bit more naturally, and they're fantastic. So I've been using the mid-length, mid-height hiking boot for those. I've tried some barefoot ones as well. They're not completely barefoot. They've got some solid stuff on the bottom, but I only use those for easier hikes. I don't like them as much for anything tougher. I think you need a little bit more solidness on your sole if you're going to be going over rocks and roots and stuff.
I like the breathability of it. That's why I like the trail runners a little bit better because they're a little bit flexible, but they're also breathable. And the technology they're coming out nowadays, like they're incorporating that into hiking shoes and everything like that. But again, this is just my personal opinion. I've tried out hiking shoes and they haven't really worked out for me. So I think it's a matter REI and some of these other places that you go to, they're very good at kind of testing it out and saying what feels most comfortable, and you can kind of trial and error some of them, to fit whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I think personal preference is a huge part of it. Like you said, if someone's had an ankle injury or you're going to be going over a lot of terrain where there's a possibility of an ankle sprain or something like that, you definitely need a little bit more support. But definitely trail shoes or low-rise hiking shoes can be great for almost any hike that you're going to do.
Definitely, yeah, and definitely make sure you have the traction on the bottom of it, because tennis shoes, I've tried that before. That's what I kind of started out when I was just starting out, and you just can't get any traction with it. So at least getting I would say at minimum have those trail runners with you.
Yeah. With the hiking expedition company like you have, what kind of stuff would you bring with you as a guide?
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting topic because I see oftentimes most people or even most companies that have first aid kits are on both sides of the spectrum, where they either provide too little or too much, right? Where they may have 200 bobby pins or something like that just in case, which that's obviously extreme with it. And so I actually create my own first aid kits.
Okay.
I like to get one of the commercial ones and kind of pick the band-aids and stuff out of that I want, and then I kind of create my own. And so usually what I have within that is, this may sound a little bit ridiculous, but plastic bags, regular plastic sandwich bags, do wonders for so many things, right? Because you can use that for covering up, scrapes and everything like that, as long as you have tape and everything. You can use it as a way to obviously keep everything inside of there, right? Like pills or gloves or whatever the case may be. So usually what I get is I have A plastic bag with a couple, and again, they're just the small, not the gallon ones, just the small, sandwich bags. And then I have, like ibuprofen in there, stuff like Advil. When you get those commercial ones, they have so many variations of Band-Aids that's a little bit unnecessary, right?
Yeah.
And then I like to have a little bit actually extra food within my first aid kit as well too, because that's the biggest thing that I see if people are just being underprepared as far as food. I mean, a big thing is obviously, like I said, gloves, because you don't want to be like touching other people's like scrapes and everything like that. That could be a bad thing that goes along with it. And then the only other thing that I would say, which is like absolutely like necessary, is things to like clean out scrapes and everything like that, right? So
yeah.
I think people tend to overcomplicate first aid in a lot of regards, right? I mean, it's not necessarily bad to be over prepared with it, but I mean, again, when I took my wilderness first aid class, like the instructor over and over again, she said multiple times, like, you can do quite a bit with like a plastic bag and some tape. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
that's a good point.
That can get you through a lot of things.
Yeah, because a lot of people will say like you always have to have like an emergency blanket and like, stuff like that along with you. But based on like the classes you took, it doesn't sound like guide companies are necessarily recommending you have to have all that stuff.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on exactly where you are, right? If you are using a guide company like mine, you probably don't need as much, right?
Yeah.
Just because us as guides, we're gonna have the bivy sack and some of the extra layers and extra food and everything like that. But in regards to if you're going out in the backcountry all by yourself, it may not be a bad idea to have a bivy sack or an extra
for
shelter that
multi-day
goes along
type
with it.
things. Yeah.
So it's really contingent on what exactly you're doing, what level of expertise you have, what level of experience you have, and then judge it based off of that. But I always like to go towards the simplistic approach with it, right? If there's ways that you can like look at things and consolidate things and say, hey, this particular item can be used for multiple different purposes, that's usually the way I like to go.
One thing I think could be really beneficial that's easy to have with you, that was recommended when I took like a sports first responder course was bandanas.
Yeah.
Like just a nice size bandana, it makes an easy sling if you have to have it. And it's not really gonna take up much room in your pack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a prime example of one of those things that you can use for many purposes, right? If you're high, you could dip that bandana in water, put it over your forehead, cool yourself down. You could use it obviously as like a makeshift towel. You could use it as a sling. There's so many ways that you could do that rather than having like 48 different items that you can use.
Yeah.
Well, that's one that can be used for multi-purpose.
Yeah. Like you said, simpler the better, and multi-purpose the better. You don't want to carry a whole bunch of stuff.
Yep. Definitely pack. I personally have a satellite communicator. I mean, they're a little bit more expensive, but you just never know, right?
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen out there in the wilderness, and you can't rely on cell phones nowadays back in the wilderness. So that's something that is a little bit more expensive, but it's small, it's compact, and $400 could potentially save your life or save somebody else's life. So I think that's a worthwhile investment. And then beyond that, definitely bring plenty of water. I see a lot of people, I mean, you'd be surprised how many people I've seen wearing exactly what you're wearing with like a single water bottle going up a 14er. It's like, that is not what you're supposed to do, right? And so I would probably have at least 3. I like to have a water bladder because it's the easiest way to utilize it. So I would at least have 3 liters. And then if you want to carry a little bit less but have a water filter, those are fantastic. You can drink straight from the stream.
As long as there's a water source.
Exactly. So that's typically what I do with it. So make sure you have plenty of water. If you want to stay extra hydrated, right, if 3 liters is maybe a little bit too heavy, or if you have a smaller backpack, I always like to add in some sort of electrolyte drink. So that's going to keep you more hydrated with less liquids that go along with it. So whether it's Gatorade or Powerade or something like that, there's plenty of little powders that are super cheap that you can put into that. That's going to give you so much more energy. And it's also going to, usually I don't recommend people drinking their calories, right? Like most dietitians don't want you to drink your calories. But out in the wilderness, you need more calories, right?
Yeah.
You're burning so many calories, you're going to be sweating it off. So if you can kind of knock two birds out with one stone, get hydration and also get calories with some sort of electrolyte drink or Gatorade or something like that, that's a key thing. And then on top of that, food. I personally, again, dietitians may hate me for this, but like, have whatever food you want. I like salty food, I like sugary food, I like carbs. The reason being,
peanut butter are one of the most popular things.
Yeah, if you're gonna be out there, there's been times when I first started, I was trying to be like healthy with it and had like, fruit and everything like that. I'm not trying to bash fruit, but when you're like, 8 miles into a day or like, 10 hours into a day, the last thing you want is like some like healthy snack to like snack on. Like you want a Snickers bar, like gummy worms or something like that.
Yeah.
So make sure you got your sugars, make sure you got your carbs. I like that combo because you can, you can get some quick energy with the sugar, but then also get some prolonged energy with the carbs. Salt is also good because you're going to be, sweating out a lot of the salt that goes along with it. The more food, the better, to be honest with you. So I like beef jerky, Sour Patch Kids. They saved my life probably multiple times up on the mountains. M&M's, stuff like that goes along with it. So plenty of food that goes along with it. And then along with like the first aid stuff and the trekking poles that we talked about, plenty of layers, right?
Yes.
So I think little things like having a beanie. A beanie can be a huge thing, right? Because it doesn't take up that much space, but it can keep you so warm. Having a puffy jacket, that's a little bit more of an investment, but they can pack down to smaller than a water bottle, and they can keep you significantly warm. And then I would make sure, even if you're hiking in August or July or something like that, have multiple layers, right? Have a pair of shorts or maybe a pair of pants that can go down into a pair of shorts. Have multiple layers that don't wear like wool socks or something like that. Maybe wear like thinner stuff like this that is breathable, that you can sweat through and everything like that. Those are the biggest things that I bring, along with it's always good to have a headlamp, to be honest with you, some sort of flashlight. You don't want to rely on your phone, again, that goes along with that, just because if you do have to spend a night out there or it takes a little bit longer than you anticipated, you want to make sure you know where you're going, because there's nothing worse than being outdoors in middle of the night and you don't know where you're going.
So a question I always get asked about is hiking poles.
Yep.
And usually my recommendation is like they're fine. They're fine. They're perfectly fine to use. If you don't want them, you don't have to use them. But for someone who's maybe older, has maybe some leg problems, knees, ankles, stuff like that, it can help alleviate some of that pressure off of those joints and redistribute it through the rest of their body. From a guide's perspective, I imagine that you are also going to want to look at what is the steepness, what is the technicalness of this trail that we're going on, and how helpful is it going to be there?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I personally don't use hiking poles, but if I'm going to recommend somebody who's like starting out, whether they're starting out with a 14er, just starting out with hiking, I probably would recommend them. Just like you said, it distributes the weight a little bit more evenly, reduces ankle sprains in some instances, and then it's another one of those items, just as I was saying with the first aid, that you can use for different things, right? Like they're pretty easy to pack down, right? They go really, really small and they can fit in your pack, and they can be used as like a splint, for example, if you need it to use for something else. I even saw something super unique in the wilderness first aid where if someone got injured, maybe they have a broken leg or a broken ankle or something like that, and they can't put pressure on it, you can kind of create this like makeshift, almost like bed to like carry them out, or almost like a cot to like carry them out of it, right? And so, I think that's one of those items that is definitely like, doesn't take up that much space, isn't super heavy, they're not super expensive, and they can be used for so many various things. And although I don't use them, like I've used them a couple times, they make things so much easier, right? Because you can use them to really keep that momentum going forward, even going down, it helps you balance a little bit more. I would definitely recommend trekking poles if you're just starting out.
Yeah, total agreement there. So another one is backpacks.
Yep.
So there's a lot of considerations with backpacks. On my end as a therapist, there's a consideration of how is it fitted ergonomically. And then on the functional side of it, what do you need for the length of hike that you're going to do?
Yep.
So give me some of your thoughts on backpacks.
Yeah, so I have a ton of backpacks just with how many different various hikes I have. I have really small ones that are maybe like 10 to 15 liters. I have medium-sized ones that are usually maybe 20 to 30 liters, and then I have backpacking ones that are like multi-day trips that I'm doing that are 40, 50, 60 liters, right? And so there's obviously various sizes and depending on what you want to do essentially with them. The main thing that I would say is kind of almost I was saying with the first aid, like a lot of people I think sometimes overpack or overdo it with things, and where I see a lot of people make a mistake with backpacks is they'll get a backpack and they'll like add all of these additional things, especially to the exterior of that backpack, and it kind of is like you're all wonky, right? Like I remember I even did a 14er once, and I had my sleeping bag because I was backpacking. I had my sleeping bag just kind of hanging off, and I was rock climbing, and every time I was rock climbing, it always like get snagged on a rock, and I would always like almost fall, and that's obviously pretty dangerous with them. So if you can have things like they have all those straps on the outside of the backpack, try not to have things like flapping around or everything. If you can like stuff them within the backpack, that's going to make it more balanced, that's going to make it more ergonomical for you and everything like that. As far as the size, I think most people probably starting out, I would get kind of that medium size, right? Like maybe 20 to 30 liters. That's usually a good size where, hey, if you're doing a short hike, right? Something that's maybe just a couple miles or something like that, it's not super heavy, right? It's not going to take up a whole lot of space or anything like that. It's not going to wear you down, but you can still put a decent amount of stuff in that. And then those are the ones I usually use for my day hikes for 14ers. So I can put extra clothes, extra food, extra water in that, first aid stuff, like all that. As long as I'm not like, no, I'm not going to be out there for like multiple days. Usually that 20 to 30 liter is pretty good. And just as I said earlier, I mean, REI and some of those other places, I'm not sponsored by REI, by the way, I just usually go to them. They're very good at like fitting it to you, right? Where there's like small, medium, large, extra large. I actually didn't know that when I first started, and I just had an old backpack from my dad. Turns out it did not fit me at all. Right? And so like when I put it around my waist, it was like up here rather than being like down near my belly button, and it was just super uncomfortable when I got done at the end of the day. Like it wasn't distributing the weight that great, and so my shoulders were absolutely dead. So if you can get one that's fitted to your size, and definitely I guess the last thing I would say is use those straps, right? I don't know the exact numbers, but I think they say about 80% of the weight or 75% of the weight should be on your waist strap, right?
Yes, definitely.
So if you have a heavier pack, even if you don't have a heavier pack, use that waist strap because that's going to alleviate weight on your shoulders, because you'd be surprised, even if it's only 10, 15, 20 pounds, if you're out there for hours, that can really put a number on your shoulders, right? So if you can really tighten up that waist strap and alleviate some of that weight off your shoulders, that distributes the weight to your hip, and that's going to help you out tremendously at the end of the day. I've learned that by trial and error plenty of times, trust me.
Yeah, I agree that like it needs to be mostly on the waist, to take that off your shoulders, and then take it off your back as well, off your spine. Another consideration that I think is important is when you're putting that backpack on, make sure the shoulder straps aren't too tight. You've got a ton of nerves that run through your armpit area, called the brachial plexus. And if you put too much compression down on those nerves, you're going to start to get some weakness and numbness and stuff going through your hands. So people definitely need to consider that as a possibility too, if they're not careful with how tight they're strapping things down. But taking that weight off and putting it here means you're likely not putting it up here, and that's going to help as well.
Yeah, it was, I had a 14er that I did, actually the most difficult 14er I ever did. I think the main reason is I had a backpack that didn't fit. And I had too much equipment in it and everything like that. And after that, I kind of learned. It was night and day between that 14er and like the ones I did afterwards when I got a new pack and like the weight was distributed evenly, it fit me better, I was able to fit stuff in it better.
Yeah.
That's a very important aspect of if you're starting out or even like trying to expand into other, more difficult hikes or anything.
Yeah. So 14ers are always a big topic in Colorado, and people want to know like what's the best way to prepare for them. So like on my end, I always want to make sure people are strong. Like if you're more strong, you're good, more resilient, less likely to get hurt.
Yep.
So I've usually got people doing a lot of like box step ups, even with weight, have some weight on it, and maybe simulate what it's like to have a backpack. Not only coming up, but coming down as well, because the downhill can be just as treacherous, if not more so, than the actual going up part. I'm also looking ahead towards injuries, which we're going to touch on in a little bit, but making sure people's outer glutes are really strong too, so that their knees line up well when they're hiking and they're not continually dipping in and putting you at risk for things like tendonitis and other kinds of knee pain that might pop up. What are some of your thoughts, Drew?
Yeah, I would definitely say a lot of that stuff, makes sense. Make sure you're, properly training from a strength perspective and everything. And although this may seem, kind of obvious when I say it, you're gonna be above 12,000 feet of elevation for a decent amount of time. I mean, we're talking about hours if you're doing a 14er. And I've seen plenty of people that, that I follow on YouTube that, are ultra marathon runners and are, live out in Arizona or Utah, and they're doing all these 40-mile hikes and everything like that. And then they come over here to Colorado and they get above, 12,500 feet, 13,000 feet, and they're breathing heavy. They're in great shape, but you have less oxygen above above those elevation points. And so I think that's an important aspect to mention of making sure you're preparing for that, right? So not only doing the strength training, but also maybe going to places like Leadville, for example. And maybe you're spending a night there. Maybe you're camping out at higher elevations just to get used to the elevation that goes along with it. You're not maybe necessarily doing a 14er, but maybe you're doing shorter hikes, like 3 or 4 miles, just to kind of get into the swing of things. I think that's an important part of hey, if you're trying to get into this, even me, I've done over 60 14ers in my life.
Yeah.
And when I get above tree line, it's more and more difficult, right? Even if it's a short 14er, right? It's extremely difficult to be able to do that. So regardless of how many you've done or how experienced you are or how good a shape you are, those are pretty extreme elevations, and I think you need to prepare for that by, like I said, sleeping or preparing in higher elevations that go along with that. So that's a big thing. And then I think a lot of people sometimes skip over the mental aspect that goes along with 14ers, right? There's the physical part of it, which is obviously super, super important, but there's also one of the biggest parts is just mentally, right? Are you mentally prepared to be out in the wilderness, to have your breath, making it harder to breathe and everything like that? Maybe being solo for a little bit of time if someone's either in front of you or behind you, right? There's so many uncertainties that go along with it. So making sure, you're not overreacting, but you're not underreacting, right? If you're breathing a little bit heavy, realize that that's part of it, right? And so don't overreact and say, oh, we need to call the helicopter in right now. But at the same time, if it's continual and if you're having to take a break every 5 or 10 minutes, well then maybe it's worth it to go back. The best thing you can do is, if you're really feeling bad, go back down to elevation, right? And maybe come back another day. You know what I'm saying? That's the most important thing, of just knowing where your limits are, knowing where to push a little bit further, but also knowing when to take a step back and being okay, 14ers aren't going anywhere, right? They're not picking up and leaving, so I can always come back and do this a different time.
Yeah, I think along the lines of gradually preparing yourself, maybe doing some hikes that are 12,000 feet, and then you can build yourself up a little bit there. See how you are at 12.5 instead of 14.3, and then work your way up.
Exactly. Yeah, and if you can find various hikes of maybe try ones that are, higher elevations, and then try different ones that are, maybe longer, or maybe they're very steep. Try different variations to see how you do with it, and be like, what is the most difficult part of this? Am I breathing heavy at the higher elevation ones? Well, maybe I just need to spend more time at higher elevations. Or maybe I just did a shorter one, but it was really steep and my knees really hurt. Well, maybe you need to strengthen your knees a little bit, or maybe do a little bit more rehab with that, right? Kind of like trial and error it a little bit, and see, what areas maybe you need to work on the most with it, and just gradually work up to it.
Yeah, like that. Obviously, I see a ton of hiking injuries in what I do, and you do your best to prepare people for what they might encounter in terms of pain. Some of it's preventable, some of it's not. I mean, sometimes you trip, you fall, you shatter your arm. You can work on your balance and strength a little bit to help with that, but sometimes things just happen. So a lot of what I tend to focus on is more of repetitive injuries. So it goes back to some of the other stuff that we talked about before. Is your footwear right? Is your preparation right? Have you been strength training? Have you been gradually building up to this big hike instead of coming from the couch to a 20-mile adventure? You've got to really think about what your preparedness is in that sense. But some of the big injuries we see are lots of tendonitis, patellar tendonitis, Achilles tendonitis, tendonitis of some of the muscles in the hips, things like that. People get back pain from not wearing the right pack, or wearing it poorly. And then I mentioned earlier some shoulder injuries that can happen from your pack being incorrect as well. But really the biggest thing I think people can do, one, know their limits, but then two is just get as strong as you possibly can. Get in the gym, work with a PT, work with a trainer, work with myself as a therapist, work with someone that may know what you're going to end up encountering. Make sure you have strong hips, strong calves, good core strength is always helpful as well. And that's going to help people avoid injuries in a big way.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and even me, like I said, I don't wear like high top shoes, and so when I first started doing these 14ers, man, first couple years I sprained my ankle probably twice a summer, right? Because my ankles and my knees were getting used to it. But now they've adapted and my balance is better, and I'm just used to it more, where I can even see, like, sometimes I step and like my ankle kind of twists a little bit, but it's stronger now, where it doesn't actually sprain, compared to, hey, if this was 2 years ago, it would actually sprain. And so part of it is that too, of like getting out into the environment as well too, and like putting yourself out there. I'm not saying like sprain your ankle over and over again, but just getting out and getting your feet used to, like you said, if you're just coming from the couch, up into the mountains, your ankles are going to be like, what do we do? We're not used to this,
Yeah, I think on we're not at sea level, but like at base elevation, what you can do is you can challenge your ankles in a lot of different ways. Put yourself on an unstable surface, on a Bosu ball or a foam pad, or something like that. Do some exercises off of that. Your ankle starts to adjust, and then when you do hit a rock funny while you're out hiking, it will just kind of bounce right back into the spot that it's going to, instead of completely collapsing into a sprain.
Yeah. One where I think this was actually the last sprained ankle I had, but I went out on my own, and I took a week off of work, and I decided to do 3 solo 14ers, and then meet my brother and do 2 additional 14ers. So it was like 5 14ers in like 3 days or something like that.
That's a lot.
So it was quite a bit, right? And so I did the 3 on my own, had a great time, and then I met my brother, and I was actually, we did the last 2 14ers as a duo, right? So we did the first one, did the second one, and we were coming down from the second one, and it was this was in October, so it was near the end of the season and everything like that. As if my like body like knew, okay, you've pushed yourself to the limit. I actually sprained my ankle right at the end of it, and I just had to hobble my way down from it and everything like that. So that wasn't too super bad, but I mean, I've had plenty of that stuff. I've dropped about 100 feet down like an ice slope before, and like really scraped myself up. So
yeah.
some of this stuff you can't prepare for sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
And so even I didn't get injured during this, but even the last 14er I did, I actually got charged by a moose. It was probably from me to here, to be honest with you. Crazy experience, right? It was like a really easy 14er. I saved it like purposely for like an easy one for the last one, and almost got ran over by a moose, my dog and I. So like, you can't really like plan for that type of stuff, but I think, you know, if you're in the right physical condition, and you know, I knew there were moose in that area, so I was kind of aware of it. You can put yourself in a better position to, you know, come out the other side a little bit safer. So.
Yeah. So when I was in physical therapy school, one of my clinical rotations I did was in Bozeman, Montana, and I was coming from Illinois, and I wasn't used to hiking, but I got out to Montana and I was just so stoked on hiking. I was so excited about it, and I did a few hikes the first few days, and then I did a long weekend in Glacier National Park. You know, within probably 2 weeks of getting there. And I think back to back days, I did like 12-mile hikes, back-to-back days, and I came back and my knee was killing me. And I should also note that I was a broke doctorate student, so I bought like the cheapest hiking shoes I could find.
Yeah.
So they weren't the highest quality, and yeah, my knees were killing me. I had some tendonitis that had developed pretty quickly in my knees from you know, from doing all that in such a short amount of time without any ramp up period. So, you know, when I tell people like, hey, like this is what happens when you don't prepare properly, like I've seen it, I've lived it at some point in my life. It definitely happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely been there before. So.
Yeah. Yeah.